My name is Marilyne Andersen and I'm Director of the Daylight Award. The Daylight Award aims to raise a holistic understanding of the importance of daylight in research and in practice. Every second year we are rewarding an architect and a researcher for their achievements. We believe in cross-disciplinarity and in bridge building, and we want to be more than an award. And that's why we are now launching a series of daylight conversations. On the 16th of May, the International Day of Light, we are launching our first conversation between Marilyne Andersen, the Daylight Award laureate 2016 for her research, and Lars Courage, previous chairman of the Dutch Daylight and also previous recipient of the Dutch Daylight Prize. The conversation will be joined by members of the Daylight Award community who will ask questions based on their own insights from architectural practices or chronobiology research. We invite you to follow the conversations. Feel free to sign up for the newsletters and also give us your good proposals for future conversations. Please enjoy. Marilyne.
Yes, there.
You have a Master of Science and in physics. Recently you have been the Dean of the School of Architecture at EPFL. You have been driving a lot of initiatives, projects and startups. And recently you have also co-curated the exciting exhibition Lighting Up in Lausanne. How important do you find to work across disciplines?
Not very important.
No.
So, I mean, it's part of my life. Yeah, so no, I wouldn't say it's essential, but maybe today with how disciplines are evolving and where research is emerging and where new discovery is emerging, it is probably more important than it used to be, because now the new findings are likely to come between disciplines, not within traditional disciplines. So I think that having a way to engage with others is very important. What we should not become is generalists. We should not all do a little bit of everything, because this would be the end of both research and practice. This is just the end. We have to have competences that bring something different to the table, that is unique and that other people can value, but we have to be able to reach out to people who are not like us in a certain way. So it's like the T-shaped in the profile that we need to be. So we have to be able to hold hands with other people, but we have to have something to bring. If we are all generalists, we will not go any further, so very far. So, and for me personally, interacting with people who think differently from me has been much more exciting in a way. So after a while, you get to know a subject quite well, and then when you start to discover a new subject, and as a physicist, as you said, it took me 2 years to really have real scientific conversation with a neuroscientist. It was Stephen Lockley at the time at the Harvard Medical School, and I thought I'm better equipped than an architect to talk to a neuroscientist, but no, it doesn't matter. It still is another language, is another way of thinking, of having priorities to, and so this, so it takes time, but it's very rewarding. So yes is the answer.
Thank you. Lars, your practice won the Dutch Daylight Award in 2012 with a house without windows. Yep. And since 2015, you have been the chairman of the Dutch Daylight Foundation. And recently you stopped your work. Yep. But you have been working together with architects, lighting professionals, scientists, clients, authorities. To what extent do clients and authorities listen?
Aha. They don't. That's true, they don't. You have to convince them. What we see, what is happening is that architects tend to focus on their design. Clients tend to focus on the functionality they want. Governments tend to focus on regulations. And as you already said, the magic is happening not on one of the islands, it's happening in between. So with winning the Dutch Daylight Award in 2012, we started with a client who was not normal. It was a man and a woman living together with a Danish dog, a lap dog, they called it. And they said, we want something completely different. We don't want a regular house. We're not regular. He was covered in tattoos and with a lot of piercings. He was a cool guy. He was different. And he said, I don't want a regular house. I want something different. I want a machine to live in. And that means that if you say to the government, dear guys from the government, we would like to build a house as a machine for 2 people to live in, they start scratching the ears and they don't know how to do it. So what you see, what's happening is that you need to focus on making the government enthusiastic about ideas. You have to pack them, to inspire them. And that's not just an idea of an architect who is pushing and pushing and pushing, because that's more or less what architects are known for, that we always push and tend to get our all right. But then this collaboration between municipality, the client and us, and see how we can interact and to see where the solutions might be not in the regular area. So on the client point of view, it means you have to convince them, you have to inspire them, you have to motivate them. And it can be also, let's say, an industrial plant, for example, a chemical factory, or where they sell trucks, and just tell them you're selling trucks from a box with an office in front of it, and now we're going to do it differently with daylight. And they say, there's something wrong with you. And then you have to convince in the beginning yourself, and then to convince the client. And if you have convinced the client, you have a team. And with this team, you go to the government and say, okay, we are intending to do something differently. And this path of taking not the direct route, but taking detours to get at the goal to make something beautiful with daylight, that's the main focus for me as an architect in how I do my profession.
What do you think, Marilyne?
I think it's more nuanced than that. I think talking about it or using it, making it part of design or research, it's the problem is in a way that it's too evident. So everybody uses daylight, and the fact that it's part of everything in a way, and therefore sometimes we don't then stop and pay attention to it because it's anyway about daylight. So I think we talk about it in the sense of, or it is there enough, probably yes, but understanding the subtleties or the multi-dimensionality of daylight is maybe not there enough. And I think to get across the message that there is a multi-dimensionality in daylight, that it's about energy. Sure, it has been, I would say, more about energy than today with LEDs. It's less about energy. But it's about emotion. It's about beauty. It's about dynamism. It's about connection to the outside. It's about evolution. It's about physiology. It's about all of those, and the complexity related to what makes a difference might not be talked enough. Yes, I would say that.
And again, adding to it, what we see at universities or at schools, architectural schools, it's not emphasized enough. It's as you said, it's there, but if you have projects where daylight as a subject is taught, the new generation of architects are getting more and more aware of it. And you see those universities who teach architecture with daylight and those who don't, different students come out of school. And you see the architects who are taught with daylight have a better luggage, in my opinion.
Where are we today compared to 10 years ago or 20 years ago when we are talking about daylight?
Well, I would say, for once, we have a good answer to that. Because usually it's, yeah, it has always been, etc. But this time, we have a real answer, which is this discovery of melanopsin in the 2000 made a big difference. And so about 20 years ago, and this is part of why Russell Foster got the award, so we all knew and have known for centuries that we are circadian, that we have rhythms. What we didn't know was that in the back of our eye, we don't just have cones and rods, we have this up to then unforeseen photoreceptor called melanopsin or IPRGCs in the back of our retina that is actually responsible, together with the visual photoreceptors, but that is responsible for entraining us to this light-dark cycle, and that we share with all these other species of living. So how we should live, kind of, is entrained by the solar clock, but how we do live is with darker days than we should and brighter evenings than we should. The fact that we disturb this rhythm all the time is really bad for them, or maybe some of us are shift workers, and it has actually long-term effect on health in a very demonstrated and unfortunately immeasurable way. Before 2000, after 2000 is a different era. Until 2000, it was all about, okay, how much payback time for the investment of daylight, and how it's really, finally we understand that it's not about that, it's about well-being, it's about these other dimensions that is not just providing light, it's more than that. But we don't yet have the tools. We don't yet have the ways to assess, evaluate, discuss this in a true evidence-based sense, because the field is so new. There is a lot of marketing, a lot of dangers in selling, trying to use this to sell, like blue hazard glasses. There is all this talk about blue light, etc. And as also Selma was mentioning, blue light is actually great in the morning, where we have to tell our body that this is the day, but it's only bad, quote unquote, in the evening, when we would artificially delay the moment where the night, the biological night, would start. So blue is not bad per se. Blue is only bad at the wrong time. So there is this double-edged sword, I would say.
What about historical references? Are we forgetting historical best practice?
I would say we do a little bit the opposite. So there was, indeed, before we had no choice. So only daylight, so you do what you can with it. Then we invented electric lighting. I mean, not me, not any of us, but someone invented electric lighting, and air conditioning. Therefore, okay, closed buildings, no need to care for the outside. Then we had an energy crisis, yes. And then awareness came back to, okay, maybe we're not so right to get rid of the outside. So the history is bringing back these benefits of what we evolved under, going back to nature, kind of, under which we evolved. So it's less hard today than it was maybe 20 years ago to argue that daylight is important. It's a bit easier now, which is good.
We see in architecture the tendency to get rid of craftsmanship and embrace prefabrication. So nowadays the production should be faster, should be cheaper, should be more, the quality should be higher, and that means that we tend to lose ourselves in the computer. That means production is based on models. Design is based on models. So we see a lot of people who are into the computer, know exactly how to program a new building, but forget where they're coming from. And we try to emphasize that we have to look back to where the quality came from craftsmanship. If you ask at a university right now, the students, how much looks outside, they don't know it. There is light, but they don't understand how much light is outside compared to the inside. So if you would start designing, we say don't start with a box and making holes inside, start outside and cover up those parts of light where you don't want the light or where you don't want the heat. It's a different approach. And then we said with our partners, please let's start the classic tour for Dutch Daylight and visit old projects. And with the new architects, with the new engineers, with the new production companies, we entered old buildings and we were, wow, jaw-dropping, beautiful. So there's a lot of beauty in old architecture, and looking back brings information to make a better future. If we help each other across borders, and we think not in borders for a country, but help each other, we can inspire. And for me, inspiration and motivation is the most important, because otherwise we will have these kind of moments where light is entering on Dixon Avenue in America and see, wow, there's daylight. We have to be aware that daylight is there.
Thank you. You in the audience? Yeah, that's one.
Hi. I have a little bit provocative question for you, Marilyne. we see a lot of research showing, especially for health and so on, how daylight affects. But all of that research, as I see it, is made by people who can sort of use it to prove their own right in this field. Is there any sort of bias? Can there be any bias? Or what have been done to make sure that there's no bias in terms of ourselves researching how we are invaluable in this business?
So, first of all, I like provocative questions. Well, if there is a bias, it's bad research. Full stop. So if we already have an answer and we do everything we can to try to get to that answer, that means we don't do proper research.
What I mean is, like, all of us are somehow in an interface between research and practitioners, or practitioners and clients. And I, for instance, I'm a practitioner, but I use that research as argument for why am I focusing this much time on a project, looking at daylight, for instance. And I'm defending that, or I guess we all are somehow defending why should we have that window. I can be met by questions by my clients saying, but isn't that just daylight researchers who want to show that daylight researchers is indispensable? Okay,
that's very interesting. Very interesting. Well, I would say two things. First, the science sometimes only proves the evidence in the French meaning, like what is obvious, the obvious. We evolved under daylight. So it's not a big surprise that daylight is good for us. Otherwise, our eyes would have evolved differently. When you go to a restaurant during daylight, where do you want to sit? How many people choose to sit away from the window? How many people choose to want the office that has no windows? How many? Okay, we don't need PhDs to understand that there is something that we like about it. So there is the obvious that science just brings slightly more maybe depth into, like understanding, but why or how much exactly, how little is too little, how much is too much. This is what science can bring, not the fact that daylight is good for us, because otherwise we would be different, simply. Then when you use, or when any of us uses science to convince, this has to be done in a very, very careful way. Because if you use it just to get your arguments through without caring that this is correct, this is very dangerous. And I had this experience once when I was a consultant. I was a consultant as Oculite, the startup, and next to me was another consultant who was trying to sell a product. And he was used to having around him only people who had no clue about circadian rhythms and melanopsin, and who mixed up melatonin with melanopsin, like no clue. And so he was trying to sell his thing for a project that had a roof to which I was trying to bring skylights, obviously. And he was like, no, we could put that product instead on the ceiling, when you can have a hole, actually. It's more expensive to have the screen than to have the hole, just to. And he was like, and melatonin and melanopsin and did he say circadian clock, like these nonsensical stuff, trying to get his thing sold. And I was like, okay. And then at the end, the client asked me, Marilyne, what did you think? And I said, do you really want to know? Yeah. No way. And that's what I thought. Okay, so my body language, I think, was a bit too clear to read. But so this is the issue. When you call science at your help, you really have to master it. You have to use the right words in the right way for the right thing to talk about what really not try to borrow the science to talk about something that is actually not exactly what it was meant for. And as scientists, we are trained to really stick to what we know and always say, this I'm not an expert in, and this I don't want to. And I think maybe this is more the danger, because once you really talk about what you know and you use evidence for what you want to get across, then I cannot understand how you couldn't be convincing, especially as you talk about an obvious thing, which is that daylight is what we evolved under and therefore that is good for us. As architects, you have the experience, the intuition, the know-how that was built maybe not on running simulation and on making calculations, but you still have the know-how. And oftentimes, again, as consultant for Oculite, I see that the architect is trying to get something done and it's the right thing to do, but the client is not convinced because there is, why should I pay for that? And then when we come in and say, okay, this is the difference it would make, okay, and then they are ready to buy. So sometimes this partnership with someone who knows the science can help in not going further than what you would have done as architect, because you're right.
From my point of view, with all, for example, the Dutch Daylight projects, there's a lot of information within the projects, within, let's say, the non-professionals who are just working there. Are they research for their experiences? Because I think that might be a very convenient and convincing answer towards new clients. He did something for me, or a different architect did something for me that was so beautiful, it was so cool, and people were happy in the office. Please do it. That will be much more convincing. And then architects and scientists or researchers, they can use it. This is Lidl, from the supermarket Lidl. And they said, if the chickens are much more healthy, the eggs will be better and the meat will be better. So make something where the chickens are happy. They did. And it worked. And it's not the first one. They are putting everywhere these kind of barns just to keep happy chicken.
I don't know if it's a comment or something to add to the discussion. I think that in a way, daylight is obvious. Actually, we started our urban scale project by researching on ads, on ads in platforms to find houses. And we discovered that, for example, in Madrid, 65% of the ads mention bright daylight, sunlit in a way, but at the same time with no proof of, or with no backup behind. So in a way it's fundamental, but at the same time there is no evidence, there is no nothing. And I have the impression that, I'm an architect myself, that the architect is in this limbo of how much light they might have inside, maybe yes, maybe no. And I think that representation is something that is missing today. What do you think?
I think what is obvious is that daylight is good for us. That's what I think is obvious. The very non-obvious part is how much will make a difference, what do you really need, how much will you get in that space, because this changes over seasons, days, hours. What has been shown, at least in one study, was that the price of the renting price is slightly higher, and I say slightly because the percent is low, but actually this is very important. It's about 6% higher in Manhattan. It was a study in Manhattan. So they looked at all the flats everywhere in Manhattan and looked at how much view there was and did simulations to see how much daylight there was. And then the combination, either view or light or both, led to a statistical increase of 6% in the rental. So this is probably not exactly what you were looking for, but it shows that the market still somehow gives a premium to either daylight or views. So yeah, the obvious is only the fact that to spend hours arguing that daylight is good for you is evolution, from an evolution standpoint, a bit of a loss of time, because it should be evident, but of course you can explain it, of course. On the other hand, it's not at all evident what to do with your building to make it well daylit, not at all. Yeah, and this requires expertise and experience and a good architect and sometimes also help from others, of course. Yeah.
So from an investment point of view, adding to it, if you can convince the clients, the financial interested clients, in getting better daylight inside will improve the investment, that might be a reason why investors tend to open up more with daylight and work with daylight. So what we did, as I said, we made some design tools. It's very simple. We said, what's the essence about these daylight? How do I interact with daylight? What's the context? of daylight? How does the effect of indoor and outdoor work, when I look outside, what is the effect of daylight? The inside-outside effect is, we saw just a moment ago, the circadian clock. How does it work with our body when light is coming in blue or red in the evening? The way that daylight enters, the artificial versus natural, and the connection in biology. And those 7 themes, we say to architects and to designers and to government, it's not either or, it's and. And does it mean that all the 7 have to be in one project? No, they shouldn't. But you have to understand that the essence, why we use daylight, is the most important.
I really appreciate the presentation you made for the Dutch daylight. I was wondering, the first building that you showed was this huge building with mostly like glass surfaces on the outside, and you showed the beautiful daylight that comes in during the day, and that was amazing. But my concern was, does it turn into a big light box at night? Because animals, insects, just the biodiversity around the building may be very highly impacted by this artificial light at night, and it looked like this big light box. So I was wondering if on one side we're getting this huge benefits during the day, but are we also looking into the maybe disadvantages at night?
There are 2 ways to look towards your question. One is, it was 2008, so there was a different approach towards biodiversity, about health, about green. Topics have changed, emphasis have changed. And in those days it was, there are working people in a tower, the tower is closed, can we open the tower and give the people who are working inside a better environment, have much beautiful more side outside, and keep the warmth out because of, let's say, the glass panel is half covered in this transparent meshes. So I worked at that company, and I know that their focus was in those days on people, on outside, on view outside. If you would make the same design, you would take the same tower and make it in 2023, I think the design would be different, because they would take into account much more, it would be much more influenced by topics around it. And in those days it was just getting daylight inside a building, because prior to 2008 it would have been a redesign of the interior, and the outside facade would be a little bit, let's say the old panel would get off and the new panel get on, and perhaps a new window, and that would be it. So for those days it was quite a revolution. It was the beginning of Dutch daylight, where the effect of daylight for the interior was tremendous. But I think you will take it in time. Every decade topics will change and the emphasis on a building will change.
Other disciplines or areas that we are missing in the broader discussion about daylight?
For the short version, Lars.
Right now, not specifically where I say, okay, we need this or this extra to become more aware of daylight. We're doing already a lot. There's not, for me, a specific industry area or science area where something is missing. It's there. We only have to combine it to make people aware of it. That's it.
I think the links are missing. I think we can work much more on getting more bridges to other fields from which we can borrow. If we just take our former laureate, getting back to the Daylight Awards, Greg Ward, this is a rendering engine that we have been using for decades, but computer graphics field and SIGGRAPH conference are in another world of ray tracing. If we had linked to that field early on, or still would now, we could maybe do that much faster. Same for neuroscience, same for... So these links take time, but they could enrich the daylight field from practice or gaining knowledge that can be useful. That is also at the core of putting such a project together, is to make sure you reach out to people that don't think like you, that don't work like you, and that is much more rich, because then you can learn from each other and then you can push to another level.
Thank you, Marilyne. Thank you, Lars.
You're welcome.
Thank you all.